of principle. Probably miss.
But it's not my concept. It's a concept for the ECG, and it means that they think that the main purpose of European Union is to create an internal market. What does it mean? A market?
A unified internal market in EU?
Yeah.
Not in each state.
Not in each state. In EU. Okay. Internal market means
the territory of all the states.
In the territory of all the state members.
Of the European Union.
Yes, it. Internal market means no freedom of movement, the basic freedoms, freedom of movement of persons, capitals, goods.
Frans van Nistelrooy described it in the concept of tax as this. He said if you hit a billiard ball in Ireland, it would obviously get a bit wet, but could it get to Estonia without being interfered with by tax?
No. Exactly.
So it's the billiard ball principle of...
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the twofold neutrality. You said that direct tax shouldn't interfere with freedom of movement, and freedom of movement shouldn't interfere with direct tax.
Yeah.
In the first one, I understand. The idea is that if some direct tax interferes with freedom of movement, then you can't impose that kind of a tax. Because France can't impose a higher tax on German companies or on German goods or on than they do on French nationals or French goods.
Yes.
So it's a limitation on direct taxation. When you say that freedom of movement needs to be neutral with regard to direct taxation, does that mean you can limit freedom of movement in order not to interfere with direct taxation?
No. What I think it's possible and should be reached is that freedom of movement is interpreted in such a way that it will only be used as a tool to stop direct taxation or the differences of direct taxation when they really hurt freedom of movement. So it's a self-restraint from the European Court of Justice in this particular sense. I give an example. If I state for the following, control. I say all non-residents that have revenues in Portugal are exempted from presenting, for instance, a declaration because the source company is going to pay the dividend or the interest or whatever, should notify the tax authorities of that particular payment. And if I make something different by saying all the residents must present a declaration, paper declaration or e-declaration in order for all the revenues they had, am I creating discrimination? My answer is no, I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm treating differently the non-residents from the residents. But why? Because every time a company pays for a non-resident, he is the one who declares that revenue to the fiscal administration. So am I creating a discrimination? My answer is no, I'm not. This is something that is needed for the cohesion of the fiscal system, in the sense that residents may have other revenues and not the ones who are declared through the sources. Basically also non-resident revenues that came from foreign sources. This is a discrimination because I'm treating differently non-residents from residents, but still the European Court of Justice should not interfere with this particular decision. Why? Because it does harm the freedom of movement. It does, the fact that you declare or not declare does not harm the essence of the possibility that you have to go elsewhere, find money elsewhere, or whatever. So this is, it should be, it's an example I gave to you of something that could be potentially considered as being discriminatory, but, and it is in fact, because it's a different treatment of non-residents to residents, but it does harm the freedom of movement.
So if I understand correctly, and I'm not sure if I understand correctly, the twofold neutrality is basically an exception to an exception.
Yes.
So it's not really, so it's the key principle is freedom of movement.
Yeah.
Direct taxation can't interfere with that, but we're going to interpret freedom of movement in a slightly more narrow way so that direct taxation won't be considered as violating that rule.
If it doesn't violate it essentially. So it's a concept of essentiality. If it harms freedom of movement, yes, they might say this cannot be so. You cannot do this.
But we'll limit our understanding of what freedom of movement means.
Especially not being taken as a fundamental, it's a fundamental principle, but also measure the consequence of that particular discrimination. If it's of no consequence as far as freedom of movement means on the economic point of view, you should not interfere. If it harms economically your option, your decision, then yes, it's against the treaty, you cannot do so.
Can I, just to expound on
Please do.
but not the fiscal principle of territoriality, what you talk about fiscal cohesion. The way that the court has developed the practice of addressing the problems is become very clear by Marks and Spencer's. It becomes very clear. They say, is there a restriction or a discrimination? And there almost always is. It then goes on to say, is that restriction or discrimination justified? And the grounds on which they have found that restriction to be justified being very limited, and I'll come back to that in a sec. And then the third question they say is, if they've said there's a discrimination, but they've said that discrimination is justifiable, the last question they say, is the particular thing that they've done proportionate? Could they do it in a less onerous way? So that's the way the courts have developed, and it's very clear. And there almost always is a discrimination, otherwise it wouldn't have got
Wouldn't be there.
Yeah. And it's in really the development of the second and the third questions that the interesting bits would be. Now there was the very early case of Bachmann where they introduced this concept of fiscal coherence, and in that case it was whether somebody could deduct a pension contribution and whether they'd be taxed in that same jurisdiction on the pension. And they said that was sort of giving a deduction and taxing the thing which the deduction was critical, and so that if you weren't going to do that, you were allowed to deny somebody a tax relief if that person was not going to be there by the time of the pension. Now, that was probably a mistake, and the doctrine of fiscal coherence sort of lurked only to be kicked out for the next 10 years, because they said, oh, if it was double economic taxation, it didn't count. Then it re-emerged in 1997 in a case called Futura, which was another cross-border loss relief, but they didn't refer to fiscal coherence in that case. They referred to the fiscal principle of territoriality.
What's fiscal coherence, by the way?
Fiscal coherence in Bachmann was, it was basically, could you prevent somebody from deducting a pension contribution if they weren't going to be taxed in that same jurisdiction on that pension when it was payable? So, you know, usually with pensions you say, you know, you're allowed to deduct contribution, but you're going to catch the tax when you tax the pension. Well, in this case, this was somebody who was denied a pension contribution because they were, denied the deduction because they weren't going to be in the same jurisdiction by the time the pension was payable. So that discrimination was permitted.
And the word coherence, why is it called fiscal coherence?
Well, it's funny, sometimes it's called fiscal cohesion.
Cohesion.
There's two translations of it.
Yeah.
You've got to be familiar with ECJ judgments to know that you get kind of mantras. But basically, it seemed like there was some sort of connection between the deduction and the taxability, and subsequently it was ignored for the next 10 years. And then with Futura, you got the fiscal principle of territoriality in relation to loss relief. That did you have to give cross-border loss relief when you didn't tax the income? And it wasn't clear what that meant either. Throwaway introduction, very important, but the ECJ just bunged something in because they only give one judgment. It's all got to be approved. So often, what they don't say is much more important than what they do say. Then I think it finally has become clear to me, and this is in an article by Peter Wattle, that actually fiscal coherence, fiscal principle of territoriality, and in Marks and Spencer's, which again was cross-border loss relief, but this time with a subsidiary, in this case they talked about balanced allocation of taxing powers. Right? In that case, what it was you had, are you familiar with the facts of Marks and Spencer's? No reason to be. Marks and Spencer's UK.
You can return anytime you want to, that's what I know. That's what I know. You can return your goods anytime you want to. That's what I know about them.
Good news. Marks and Spencer's UK had subsidiaries in Europe, and all the subsidiaries in Europe made a loss, and two of them at least, well, they all closed, and Marks and Spencer's UK wanted to set off the loss relief from foreign companies against UK profits, but they were subsidiaries, they weren't permanent establishments. And the UK said, well, of course you can't bloody set the losses off, because we don't tax the profits, there's no CFC stuff, so we don't tax the profits, you're not getting the losses. But Marks and Spencer said, well, hang on, wait a minute, if we'd set up a branch in, Birmingham, we'd have got loss relief. So it's a restriction on the freedom of establishment.
Because they can switch out returns if it's in Birmingham?
Yeah, you get group relief.
But you don't get it if it's a foreign subsidiary.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
which is normal.
Mhm.
And seemed actually, symmetrical. Made sense. And the court said, yes, there is a restriction. Not being able to bring home your foreign losses was a restriction. But they took quite a sort of sophisticated analysis here. They said, in general, you are justified in stopping cross-border loss relief because it's a balanced allocation of taxing power. Now, it strikes me that fiscal coherence in Bachmann was about protecting your tax base. The fiscal principle of territoriality in Futura was about protecting your tax base. And Marks and Spencer's is about protecting your tax base. So they said, in general, you're not allowed to bring your cross-border losses. You're not allowed to change. I mean, in that case, they said they should be able to, because in fact there was no possibility of them being able to set them off there because they'd actually packed up. So there was no possibility of them being able to set the losses off in the future.
Something that didn't exist anymore.
I mean, that was odd. I mean, that's unexplained.
Isn't it capital loss?
It's a capital loss. But,
And they could use it.
well, it was actually a trading loss, but they couldn't use it because they'd all closed.
So why does the UK?
And that depends.
Why would the UK care about that? I mean, if you're not getting your income over there, why should I get your losses?
Well,
Yeah, that was the argument of.
Why do I care about
that was the balance that the court was making. Is that it's a compromise. It's saying in general you can't have cross-border loss relief because we have to protect the balanced allocation of taxing power.
But as soon as your subsidiary closes, then you can get it.
No.
In this particular case, yes.
There's a sort of always somewhere principle introduced. I mean, that they didn't say that, but there's an idea that always somewhere within the European Union, you've got to get that relief somewhere. Now, you ought to get it at home.
So freedom of installment means that if you have a gain, you pay for that gain, but if you have a loss, if you cannot do it otherwise, that was the main reason, you can put it on your main company, which they actually did.
So the focus is basically the tax base of the taxpayer, not the tax base of the government. The focus of the taxpayer needs relief, and I don't care whether you're protecting your tax base or not. You have to
well, it trumps. The starting point is the
taxpayer.
Yeah. But in general, if the taxpayer can get it at home, they have to keep it at home because we're also protecting the tax base of the. So I think when you try to explain the way in which these arguments, the way in which the questions are asked, is it discrimination? Is it justified? Is it proportionate? It might help you understand the relationship between two neutralities, because the first neutrality is the first question, the second neutrality is the second question. And there only has been one justification, really. I think there is only one justification, and I think that is your tax base. And there's another justification, prevention of tax avoidance. But again, that's tax based. So although there seem to be lots of different sorts of justifications, well, not lots of different justifications, most of them aren't accepted as justifications, they all actually boil down to one, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It's actually a conflict that you face between the common understanding of the state and its right to tax and the process of economic integration where you try to create one single market of different states. And then you have to draw the borderline. Where does the right of the state stop, because it becomes a trade barrier, actually. It prevents you from going and doing business in another state. And it's contradictory to what you want, which is to create one market where you can be free to do business wherever you like.
So this is supranational.
Yeah.
Still, I have a problem with the Spencer, my market says Spencer, unless everything is standard. Suppose there will be a totally harmonized income tax system in the United States, in Europe. Totally integrated, harmonized, everything is okay. Now I have one company in London, and it has a subsidiary all over Europe. Subsidiary, not permanent establishment.
Yeah.
And they have losses.
Yeah.
And they shut down.
Yeah.
the losses still, according to my understanding, are non-deductible. They are not offset. So why the court decided that in that case, even though according to all the basic principles, even if the system would be unified, it wouldn't be deductible, then because of one of the principles, it allowed the deduction, the court, the European court? So what do I miss?
I thought that I didn't understand.
Because, again,
No,
if
you did understand. In the case, I mean, there was a fear amongst member states that the ECJ would go, cross-border loss relief has to be allowed irrespective of whether or not you can use it. I mean, that was a fear, and that would have been absolutely, macroeconomically disastrous for some member states, because you'd obviously always set your loss off against the highest taxing country. So for Marks and Spencer's judgment to limit it to only the situations where there is no possibility of loss relief in the state of the subsidiary was actually a bloody relief. Now, why they said that is because they felt that you've got those two principles that are rubbing up against one another all the time: the freedom of movement and not having restrictions to the freedom of movement. And if you can get loss relief from a company in Birmingham, why not get loss relief from a company in Belgium? They're trying to simultaneously do two incompatible things, which is to allow freedom of movement and to allow the protection of the tax base. So, I mean, basically it's saying, in this case, the freedom of movement trumps the tax base because of, well, somebody's called it, not me, I mean, somebody called it the always somewhere rule, which doesn't fit in with any kind of, principle of fiscal territory. We're used to the idea of worldwide taxation and territorial taxation, and things should match. There should be a symmetry. So if you don't tax the profits, you shouldn't have to give loss relief. And that's why the judge in the first instance didn't send Marks and Spencer's to the ECJ. The Special Commissioner, John Avery Jones, said, it's absolutely clear, there's absolutely no way that the UK ought to give loss relief to this foreign subsidiary. And he said, there's not even an issue. So they had to appeal to the next level to actually even get permission to go to the ECJ, because he wouldn't refer it.
the problem is...
You're right, it's mad. I mean, don't try and
It's not mad because from historical point of view of the development of the process, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
The UK government should subsidize those governments who are a little bit weaker.
This is France, Belgium, Sweden.
Dutch, Holland,
Netherlands, Belgium, and France.
Now, let me just try to counter your. It's not subsidized actually, because this will have no importance whatsoever as far as tax revenue is concerned on all these countries, because it's just closed with a loss, and that's it. I mean, there's nothing against what they should ever take that loss. That's the problem. So in this particular case, the United Kingdom didn't subsidize these countries because there was no payment, there was no transfers. What happened is that the Marks Spencer's, Belgium, the Marks Spencer's, just closed with a loss. And what to do with this loss? If we are a company, you just click close and say the capital has a loss because the shareholders have lost money. That's it. But what happened was that the problem was they had profits in the United Kingdom. In this particular sense, you may say that they got the price of the investment, the return of the investment, which was in this particular case negative. If it would be positive, of course dividends would be distributed without taxation, because that's freedom of movement also. If by chance, Belgium, Marks and Spencer would have profits, they will be transferred to the United Kingdom with zero taxation, because it's freedom of capital going over, freedom of transfer. So in this particular case, there is no subsidized, I think. In the other case, which are the pensions, there may be some subsidies.
There is a subsidized not to the government of the foreign countries, but to the
company,
to the economic of these states, because the United Kingdom pours some money, invested, lost. lost, but the economic system of this state enjoyed this money. So what I mean is that they didn't subsidize the governments of the other state, but they subsidized the economic.
Of course, but that's freedom of movement. If you're a Portuguese, you want to go to England, to United Kingdom, Scotland, I'll say now, like Scotland, and make a company there, I can go. Nobody can say to you, you are not, even can say to me, you're not welcome here. I say, I just don't care. It's my right, I can do it. And I just get there, pick up my company, do whatever I want to do, according to, of course, Scottish laws, and I'll just keep on my own being polite, and I cannot be thrown out. That's my right. I am entitled to do it. And any member state can do it. And what can the United Kingdom authorities do? Smile, like it or dislike it, we don't care. That's the way it goes. And either way, the Scottish comes to Portugal and say, I want to make my hotel here or restaurant. Even if he's a very strange guy and we don't like it, you just have to smile and say welcome. I mean, you're entitled to it.
I think the key point, I mean, you said that it's called the always somewhere principle. What's it? What they call it? The always.
The court didn't say that. It's what somebody else.
But as far as I understand, though, the key thing is that only because had they opened up another corporation company in UK, then they would have been able to get the losses. But if, for example, UK did not, I mean, another country, and I don't know if all countries in Europe do this. But let's say, for example, that Greece does not allow joint returns. Does not allow companies.
There's no consolidation.
Yeah. Then, if a Greek company would lose money in Belgium, a subsidiary lose in Belgium, then Greece would not be forced to take that because they wouldn't have allowed it for a Greek subsidiary.
Absolutely right.
So this is the point. Okay.
Yeah. So the point is, they want to make sure that you are free to open up anywhere in Europe and not only in your home country.
Yes. It's to make sure it's no harder to operate abroad than it is to operate at home. And of course, what that means is that where there's the thin capitalisation rules and transfer pricing rules have been attacked by the ECJ. And what that has meant, of course, is that we now, in the UK and other countries have responded similarly, we now apply transfer pricing rules internally for no economic purpose, only so that we can continue to do it cross-border. The Commission are incensed by this. But you get the ECJs. You see, the differences between legislating, where you can do impact assessments and you get consent, you get the court operating in this kind of vacuum, and they make decisions which for member states are completely unacceptable. So they say, okay, if transfer pricing for foreign companies,
we'll make it internal.
We'll do it internally, and that's what people.
And that's very wise, I would say, because from what I know, what subsidies do to each other, the way they manipulate the prices internally, and that's very wise. You look at the auto industry, if you look at the auto industry, all the prices are fake. It doesn't correspond to reality whatsoever. It's all just pure accountancy. There's not even a penny being transferred from one side to the other. So I'm very glad that you made that, because that's very wise also. It's absolutely wise.
Regarding the neutrality tools and the cohesion, physical cohesions, I don't know. There are two tools. They are actually one tool, because you are judging the neutrality tools according to the physical cohesion. I mean, you have the freedom to make taxation in your own country. At the same time, you should not infringe on the constitutional principle in terms of movement of capitals or shares. So, if you have the freedom to make your own tax, at the same time, this freedom should not go against the physical cohesion. I understand this issue when you pay higher tax, but if you pay lower tax, it becomes an issue. It harms the freedom of capitals, or
no, because it's inside your borders. You cannot export your legislation.
Well, in fact, if I understood correctly, in a sense you can. I mean, if I have a company in a high tax jurisdiction, I will open a subsidiary in a low tax jurisdiction. If I earn profits, I'll be taxed at a low rate.
Yes.
If I have a loss, I'll set it off against my high rate. It's a great incentive.
Only if you can't.
I'll close the company down, of course.
Only if you close the company.
Right, I've losses. I'll close the company down and take the high and take the. So I know I'm taxed at a low rate, and I've got a great incentive that actually encourages you to invest in lower tax jurisdictions,
No, but
which is
then
against the free movement of goods.
You didn't have any profits, or you didn't benefit from the lower rate. So it doesn't matter.
No, but ahead of time, I don't know if I'm going to gain or lose. I know if I have a risky enterprise. I have a risky enterprise. Risky enterprise. If I'm in Britain, where the rest
It's an
of
internal market.
if I'm in Britain, which is a high rate of tax, and I want to take risky investment, I'll invest, for example, in Ireland with a low rate of tax. I know if turns out well, I'm taxed at a low rate. If it turns out badly, I'll close my Irish company and take the losses in Britain, which means it's encouraging me. It opposed to free movement. Instead of choosing according to economic reasons, I'll choose to invest abroad because of the tax advantage of the gain of the loss.
I mean, the court have addressed the problem of Ireland again the UK in the Cadbury Schweppes case when we've just been a bad patch for the UK. And you know the UK used their CFC rules against an Irish subsidiary of Cadbury Schweppes, and the court said, well, that's the whole point of the free movement. The whole point of the free movement is you can move somewhere where, as long as you're engaged in a genuine economic activity, that's the whole point. If it kind of sanctions tax competition. I mean, it's kind of got a very odd view about tax competition because it's got, on the one hand, harmful tax competition, which is defined as sectoral or limited or particular, the code of conduct and state laws on one side, which is saying you can't have particular types of tax competition and not limited, but broad-based, complete system of tax competition. that's they say, good on you, Ireland.
Yeah, but there's the subsidy element because the UK is subsidizing it by taking upon itself the losses at a high rate of tax. If you lose in Ireland, that's the point. If Ireland wants to have a low rate of taxation, that's their choice.
Yeah.
But then you're forcing the UK to subsidize it.
But there are many researchers that tax is never the only incentive to open it.
It's
so
the last out of three. It's
but
many other considerations. So
it's not the only one.
The commission, the commission is still stating that, as they say, tax competition in an acceptable way, it's a very good thing for the economy. That's what they keep saying on the papers, on writing.
That's not the OECD.
No.
No,
but when we talk about tax competition, we don't talk about harmful tax competition. We talk about, as they say, acceptable tax competition, which means, for instance, the difference is basically in the rates and in the way you calculate your basis, your basis for.
We found out whether it was harmful or not only when
If the case
the reason
goes
is a
to
disaster.
It's easy to
When you
find.
know that it was enough.
It's easy to find. Whatever tax rate we impose, that's the lowest you can impose without getting into harmful tax competition.
How come those
if I understand correctly,
tax
the
as Europe normally
OECD
considers
position
it
on
harmful
harmful tax competition,
How come those
the major
subsidiaries
test is
couldn't-
that you
couldn't,
do not
offset
tax
their
your own
losses?
citizens,
Because it's
But they
the
could.
way you tax foreign citizens. I mean, you give benefits to foreign citizens
never
that
had
you don't
profit.
give to your own citizens.
Yeah.
Well,
How
how
much
much
How
all
much
the
economists
economists
agree
agree
that
that this is terrible.
operating.
Yeah,
For how
but
long?
no. But as long as you
Well,
tax everybody on the same
And never
rate,
profit.
you cannot say that this is harmful tax competition.
It's harmful because it's the elimination of the welfare state.
Ruben Aviona.
I almost guarantee I see what the answer is going to be. But let's say the UK would say that fine, in accordance with that decision, we will, if you have a foreign European subsidiary that loses, we will, instead of letting you deduct the loss, we'll give you a credit equal to the tax rate in that country times your loss. Would that work? Or would they say that's against the
If it's better for the company, they would accept that.
No, not better than the company. Not better than the company. Assume you're operating in a low.
Well, I think that would
But
work
that's
because in Manningham was about an invitation system, and in Manningham, what happened was a dividend was paid from a domestic company, and they gave the imputation rate of the domestic company against the domestic dividend, but with a cross-border dividend, they gave no imputation credit. And the court didn't say that they had to give the imputation credit at the domestic rate. They said you have to give the imputation credit at the foreign rate. So it might work.
It might work, which would remove the incentive to, to...
Yeah.
There is no standard taxation in
As
Europe.
well.
It's not something similar.
The United States.
It's really something moderately similar.
I want to come back to the Marks and Spencer case. My first question concerning the freedom of movement, is it an absolute right and an infringement, you should intervene in any infringement, or it's also relative and you need to check proportionality and justification?
Yeah, there's three questions. Is it a restriction or a discrimination? If yes, we move on to the next question. Is it justified?
In terms of what's the goal on the
Of discrimination?
What's the policy of the discrimination? Okay.
Yeah,
If it's justified, means that it can be acceptable, although it.
Okay.
but there's very limited
And then
grounds on which,
proportionality.
and then is the restriction proportional to the aim?
And did they examine in this case the issue of proportionality, and they
Yes.
said
Oh,
yes,
yes.
and they said that it's not proportional
They said they were entitled to that
because it's not proportionate.
because it would be unproportionate. It would violate the freedom of investment elsewhere. If you, for a company, just had losses, I mean, the risk of investment, they could not deduct. I mean, it would be, I think, against the idea of freedom of installment and the fact that they would have to pay for all the profit they had in the UK and not deduct the losses they had from the investment they made on behalf of the freedom of movement. as I
Now,
say.
what happens if the same rule is accepted by all the EU, by the all the EU member states? If
But
all
it
the
is-
EU member states don't deduct such losses
But
in this
will.
situation,
take the
it
perspective
might be
because-
that there is no infringement of the freedom of movement because you face the same legal rule all over the EU.
Sure there is, because if you set up a domestic subsidiary, you can set it up.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you're a
It
company
was
in
in
London,
London.
They have the rule that they can consolidate the tax return of all the subsidiaries with the mother
inside the country,
company.
but not outside the country.
Inside the United and
Inside
United
the-
Kingdom.
Yeah.
And the court was, now I understand, I see it very clearly, is that this is an infringement of freedom of movement, because if this is the rule within UK, you have to apply the same rule outside the UK.
What you would understand is why the ECJ is often very hamstrung is it's always the rules of one member state that have been examined. So the ECJ can't actually ever really take a kind of proper overarching economic approach and look at two member systems at the same time. It will look at a treaty. It will look at the impact of not just the domestic rules. It started now taking in the treaty. But the way the system works is that somebody is complaining that one member state's tax system causes a restriction or a discrimination. And here it was the UK parent company that said the UK's rules discriminate. So you can only look at the UK's rules, really.
Yes, it's one of the conditions.
It's sort of that's what the question is. The question is a rule, such as the one that the UK has, which is you can't have cross-border loss rate, is such a rule contrary to one of the articles? And that's what the question is that the court has to answer. So it does sometimes look a little bit, I mean, for example, it did take into account the economic situation that the foreign subsidiaries had no possibility of loss relief. So it sometimes takes into account both sides, but it tends not to.
They took another consequence of it. They say by any means they would restart, for instance, in Belgium. Imagine that they will the sort of people, and then they will restart. That loss, even if it could be deducted under the Belgian law, if it was deductible in it could not be deducted in the Belgian authorities. That's a consequence also. I mean, if you use it once, that's it. It's gone. You cannot use it twice.
But I mean, there are all sorts of provisions with permanent establishments which allow you to claw back. You know, that you give a loss for a bit and then you claw it back and it's transferred over. I mean,
Okay. Any other questions?
Are there any criteria adopted by the ECJ about how to understand the neutrality rules or physical cohesion, or just
They talk about it. I mean, they give you. European Justice Court decisions are not necessarily clear. They're very clear on the consequences, and they say this is against them. It's no, it's a
They
go
answer
or
the
no
question.
go. They answer the question. But when you try to deep down and then try to no, you just have to go to this. Well, of course, you find things that can sort of interpret and explain the doctrine, but you have to go to the authors. And then the authors do not necessarily agree. But of course, it's case law, you know, the doctrine is made as it's applied.
What they have started to do, which is quite interesting, is in one or two areas, the Commission itself has written their interpretation of a bunch of decisions.
Yeah.
I think they've done it with exit taxes, have they?
Oh, yes. They've sort of...
There's a few areas where they have kind of, and it's quite helpful because it at least gives you a sort of summary of what they think it means.
Yeah, or on one side, on the other side, you already have, for instance, when you have the comment, ECG, the court decision, they send you to the doctrine who talked about it. You know, so you can sort of get yourself through to understand, you know, what was said about this particular concept or not. Through all books that talk about it, you know, so you can sort of find out whatever. But you know, it's a creative movement, and it's a creative doctrine.
Yeah.
We are inventing actually.
Yeah.
I mean, we are.
Maybe
discovering,
maybe,
depends.
you know, as an Israeli who goes quite often to the United States, I can tell you that, you know, I can see three regions. In one region, we still killing each other. In my region, unfortunately. In the United States, you know, this question, what do you mean? You have only federal income tax and harmonizing. And in the United States, you are in a process. Maybe you are trying to invent the wheel, and maybe because of some nationalistic feeling, you don't want to import the American model. Though I must tell you, I was reading Joseph Stiglitz's book, the second book about the colonization. I think he taking care of the colonization. And he praised the European Union and like Eastern Asia because he said they are functioning like a free market system, but they don't forget the important role of the government to supervise neutrality. And his argument before the crisis took place, he said the United States forget the role of the government, no supervision on the markets, no supervision for the neutrality. And therefore, maybe what you're doing is a little bit better than the United States. And who knows?
I mean, I think that there's an enormous historical point here is that we're trying to integrate when at the point where everybody has hugely developed and sophisticated tax systems. The United States integrated where tax was a bit on the basic side, you know, and I think that's...
Yeah.
So the issue is not integration, it's harmonization.
Harmonization.
More than
integration. It's as you say, it's a phases concept. And at the moment now, what we're trying to achieve, which what keeps saying, is the internal market. That's our concern now. We want to make sure that the basic freedoms are collected. We don't want to feel anything else, as I see it. So everybody will keep themselves as they are, you know, but we'll optimize as we can our production and our wealth.
I think the issue is integration
theoretically,
without
a lot of
harmonization in the
depends on
case of
timing.
direct taxation. Because nobody really wants to have a full harmonization of
Ladies and
direct
gentlemen, may I interfere?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I would like to shift the wand of the chairpersonship. Is there a word like this? To Marco, and before I do it, let me express some appreciation to Marco, because for the last month or so, I didn't function for personal reason. And Marco took basically everything upon his shoulder, and I thank you very much.
All right. So you know why you got some problems there.
You deserve all the, Marco deserves all the credit because he did a great job, and I think all of us are very thankful for him.
I just everything was already settled from last summer, so I just to start the engine, put the key inside, turn the key, and the engine was already prepared and the fuel was in. No more than that.
Okay. So
Back to me. Okay, we have two more papers to discuss together this morning. The first one is Nelly another one I think, which has. Well, I don't have the paper here with me, but it was so kind. She was so kind to shift her position with Hangel yesterday. No, with Isabel yesterday, and I'd like to thank her very much for this kindness.
On the other side.
I didn't speak very much this morning because, as you can see, I am in Federico Fellini mode now, and I discovered that recording is so much funny that I will try the sequel to La Vita è Bella, or sorry, La Dolce Vita, or the other Bible. Wow. So, sorry.
So in a sense, I pick up where